Let's begin with a thought experiment. Imagine you are a school teacher in the Russian Empire, and the year is 1901. For years, you have taught history and geography from the same worn, trusted textbooks. Your students have learned about the vast expanse of their world from maps that have been hanging on your classroom wall for a generation. These maps depict not only the familiar borders of Europe, but also immense territories in Asia, lands with ancient names and histories. Then one morning, a directive arrives from the Ministry of Public Education. It's a clean, official document with a new seal, announcing a sweeping curriculum reform. The directive is clear: all previous editions of textbooks are to be collected, all old maps are to be taken down, they are to be replaced by new standardized versions that have just arrived by train. The order is absolute. You are told that the old materials contain outdated and inaccurate representations that no longer serve the educational goals of a modernizing empire. You are instructed, along with your colleagues, to dispose of the old books. The preferred method, the circular suggests, is incineration, to ensure the inaccuracies do not inadvertently circulate among the populace. You stand before a fire, feeding the books you once taught from into the flames. A strange feeling settles in. It is not just about a change in curriculum, it feels like a deliberate act of forgetting. What was so inaccurate in those old volumes? What was so dangerous about the maps that showed a world slightly different from the one in the new books? You recall a specific name, a vast territory that covered much of the old maps of Asia, Great Tartary. In the new books, this name is gone. It has been replaced by a patchwork of smaller regions: Siberia, Turkestan, Mongolia. The single, vast entity has been fractured, its name seemingly erased from the official record. You are not a revolutionary or a dissident, you are a teacher. Your job is to impart the approved knowledge. And yet you can't shake the question: are you teaching history or are you participating in its removal? What happens to a world when its past is not just reinterpreted, but completely edited out? The name that might have troubled our hypothetical teacher in 1901 was not a fringe concept or a cartographic fantasy. It was, for centuries, a staple of Western geography. To understand its scale, one need only consult a source of unimpeachable authority from its time: the first edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, published in 1771. Under the entry for Tartary, it states, "Tartary, a vast country in the northern parts of Asia, bounded by Siberia on the north and west. This is called Great Tartary. The Tartars who lie south of Muscovy in Siberia are those of Astrakhan, Circassia and Dagestan. The Kalmuk Tartars who lie between Siberia and the Caspian Sea, the Uzbek Tartars and Moguls who lie north of Persia and India, and lastly those of Tibet who lie to the northwest of China." The description is not of a vague, mythical land. It is a detailed geopolitical entry, naming specific peoples and delineating vast borders. The encyclopedia names it the greatest country in the world, larger than Russia, larger than China, larger than any European empire at the time. Maps from the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, produced by the most respected Dutch, French, and German cartographers, consistently show this enormous territory. It is depicted with cities, rivers, and political subdivisions. It is treated as a known entity. Yet within a little over a century, this greatest country in the world vanishes. By the late 19th century, maps no longer bear its name. Mainstream history books no longer mention its existence as a cohesive state or empire. The official narrative we inherit today is that Tartary was simply a vague European term for the unfamiliar, chaotic lands of Central Asia, inhabited by various nomadic tribes. It was a placeholder for ignorance, not a name for a civilization. But this raises a profound question. Can a geographical entity that was documented so consistently for centuries by the world's leading scholars simply be an error? Or is the narrative of it being a catch-all term for the unknown, a later explanation, designed to neatly resolve the anomaly of a massive empire that has disappeared not only from the land, but from our collective memory? The idea that history could be deliberately and systematically altered on a national scale might sound far-fetched. Yet we have official documents that provide a blueprint for exactly such a process. Let's step forward in time to 1957. In a declassified document from the Central Intelligence Agency, titled "The USSR's Program to Falsify History," we find a detailed analysis of the Soviet methodology for rewriting the past. While the document's focus is on the Soviet Union's efforts to absorb and erase distinct national histories, particularly that of Ukraine, its description of the techniques involved is chillingly universal. The document outlines a multi-pronged approach. First, the old historical narrative must be condemned as bourgeois, nationalistic, or simply incorrect. Historians who adhere to it are to be discredited, silenced, or removed. Second, a new historical narrative is to be constructed, one that serves the current political ideology. This involves cherry-picking facts, inventing traditions, and recontextualizing events to fit the new story. Third, and most crucially, this new narrative is to be institutionalized through the state's educational system. New textbooks are written and distributed, and teachers are instructed to teach only the approved version. The goal, the document implies, is not just to control the present, but to control the past to secure the future. This CIA memo is not about Tartary. It is about a different time and a different place. However, it serves as a documented proof of concept. It demonstrates that a powerful state is entirely capable of initiating and executing a program of historical falsification on a massive scale. It shows that the tools for such an operation are not secret weapons, but the very institutions we trust: universities, academies of science, and public schools. It proves that the burning of the books, whether literal or metaphorical, is a recognized tactic in the consolidation of power. So when we look back at the sudden disappearance of Tartary from maps and encyclopedias, the question is no longer could it have been erased, but rather, if such a process of erasure is possible, what other parts of our history might be the result of a similar, earlier program. An intellectual erasure, the removal of a name from a map, is one thing, but some researchers point to a pattern of physical destruction that occurred in the 19th century, suggesting that the wiping of the slate might have been far more tangible. The most famous example is the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. The official story, taught to every American schoolchild, was that it started in the O'Leary family's barn. It was a tragic, but random, accident. However, what is often omitted from that story is what else happened on that exact same night, October 8, 1871. On that same night, the town of Peshtigo, Wisconsin, was consumed by a firestorm so intense it was described as a tornado of fire. It burned 1.2 million acres and killed an estimated 1,500 to 2,500 people, making it the deadliest fire in American history. It is almost completely unknown compared to the Chicago fire. Simultaneously, vast fires swept across Michigan, burning Port Huron and other towns. Holland, Michigan, burned to the ground on the very same night. In total, across the Great Lakes region, an estimated 2.25 million acres, an area the size of a small country, burned in a single 24-hour period. The official explanation is that a combination of drought and high winds caused sparks from railways or small fires to ignite the landscape. It was a freak weather event, a tragic coincidence of immense proportions. But some ask a different question. Was it purely a coincidence that these fires destroyed major transportation hubs, lumber centers, and cities built in an older architectural style, clearing the way for new construction and new economic systems? Chicago, for instance, was rebuilt as a modern metropolis, a hub for the new industrial age, its financial and municipal records largely destroyed in the blaze. When looking at such a synchronized and catastrophic event, one can't help but wonder if it represents more than just a confluence of unfortunate accidents. Was this the 19th century equivalent of wiping a hard drive, a physical clearing of old infrastructure and records, making way for a new, centrally controlled reality? The erasure of a past is not just about names and maps, it is also about systems. For over 700 years, the Exchequer of England ran its finances not on paper, but on a remarkably simple and secure system known as tally sticks. These were polished sticks of wood into which notches were carved to represent sums of money owed. The stick was then split in two lengthwise. The creditor kept one half, called the stock, from which we get the term stockholder, and the debtor kept the other, the foil. Because the wood grain and the notches were unique, the two halves could only be matched with each other, making forgery virtually impossible. It was a decentralized, physical and tangible system of accounting that underpinned the English economy for centuries. By the early 19th century, this system was seen as archaic. The Bank of England, a private institution given the power to print paper money, was ascendant. A centralized, paper-based system of finance was the future. The old tally sticks were declared obsolete. In 1834, a decision was made to dispose of the enormous collection of these centuries-old financial records stored in the Palace of Westminster. The chosen method was to burn them in the two heating furnaces beneath the House of Lords. The officials in charge were warned that the furnaces were not designed for such a task. They proceeded anyway. The fire from the burning tally sticks grew so hot that it ignited the wood paneling of the room, and from there the fire spread. By the end of the night, the medieval Houses of Parliament, the heart of British governance, had been almost completely destroyed. This event is presented in history as a comical, bureaucratic blunder, but it can also be seen as a powerful symbolic act. The physical records of a 700-year-old decentralized financial system were used as kindling to burn down the very building that housed the government, paving the way for a new building and a new era of centralized banking. This act of forgetting was not subtle. It was a conflagration. It echoes another, more explicit order of erasure from a different empire. After the Pugachev Rebellion, Catherine the Great of Russia issued a decree demanding that the events be given over to eternal oblivion and deep silence. She renamed the Yaik River to the Ural River, renamed towns, and suppressed the very name of the peoples who had participated, all to surgically remove a traumatic memory from the state's history. Whether by fire or by decree, the method is the same. The old system must be so thoroughly destroyed that it cannot be referenced or revived. When we gather these disparate fragments, a discarded textbook from 1901, a detailed entry in an 18th century encyclopedia, a declassified memo on the mechanics of narrative, or the smoke rising from 19th century ruins, we find ourselves at a philosophical crossroads. These events, whether separated by geography or decades, invite us to contemplate the fundamental nature of collective memory. Traditionally, we are taught to view history as a solid, linear accumulation of facts, an ever-growing library where each new volume adds to the clarity of the past. However, these anomalies suggest a different perspective. Perhaps history is less a permanent monument and more a dynamic, shifting tapestry, where the threads we choose to keep determine the picture we see. To reflect on these silences in the historical record is not necessarily to search for a hidden hand, but to recognize the inherent fragility of human documentation. Every archive is by its very nature a filter. For a story to be told, other stories are often simplified, condensed, or allowed to fade into the background. This process of conceptual drift might explain why a name like Great Tartary can transition from a geographical certainty to a forgotten term. It raises a profound question about the relationship between power, time, and the stories a society tells itself to maintain its sense of identity. Does a civilization evolve by remembering everything, or is a certain degree of forgetting necessary for a culture to move forward into a new era? Perhaps the most significant inquiry here is not about the validity of any single map or the cause of a specific fire, but about the nature of our own perspective. We live within a framework of inherited knowledge that feels complete, yet these historical echoes remind us that our understanding of the world is always a work in progress. To ask why certain records vanish or why certain narratives become standardized is to engage in a deeper philosophical dialogue with the past. It suggests that the true value of history lies not just in the answers we are given, but in our willingness to examine the spaces between the lines, to acknowledge that what is absent is often as meaningful as what remains. By observing these patterns, we don't necessarily find a different history. Rather, we develop a more nuanced awareness of how the present moment is shaped by the shadows of what came before.